What's great about this, I can say, shut the fuck up. Back the fuck up, motherfucker.
Sounds like Tupac's album.
Kiss FM, piece of shit. Fuck Kiss FM. Fuck you guys, man. We were really immature when we wrote that record.
Yeah,
this time
we're just gonna crank out a whole bunch of heart and soul for you this year.
This is a bleeding record.
Yeah.
We're gonna bleed all over this record. My balls are clean, man.
You heard it online, kissfmi.com.
Yeah, you
His
did.
balls are clean.
My balls are clean.
Divisive names in music are a dime a dozen. From butt rock bands that are known for being some of the worst music on the planet, yet routinely headline festivals and play arena shows like, fucking Nickelback, to important and influential artists whose music and influence hold an important point in both music history as well as the industry at large, all while having a nuclear personality that overshadows all of their artistic endeavors and, in the eyes of many, discredits any achievements they once had, such the likes of Kanye West or even Michael Jackson. And then there are the few bands that sit somewhere in the middle, one in particular being a massive success that has risen and fallen multiple times, creating extremely popular and influential music that captures the era they came from, but a band that is one of the most mocked, reviled, and hated bands to walk the earth. That band is Limp Bizkit.
It's all about the he says, she says bullshit.
Ah, yes. It's time we talk about the Floridian rap rock legends that took the world by storm, only to end up having their legacy routinely ridiculed and scoffed at, and be seen as one of the worst bands to ever get radio play. While this stigma, as well as the one that sits over nu metal as a genre in general, has more or less dissipated over the years, with newer generations becoming fans and many of the old heads finally coming around, Bizkit and the genre they championed are still extremely divisive, which makes them even more of an interesting case to study. Most bands, no matter how bad, will never see a tsunami of hate even close to the size of Fred and Friends, but even fewer of them will ever revel in the spoils of success that symbiotically lays at their feet. So, enough of the introductions, and enough beating around the bush. Let's just cut to brass tacks and talk about how Limp Bizkit took over the world.
Hey, it's Weekend Warrior Doug Green on WAAF's Real Rock TV. We're at the 1997 Warped Tour. We're sitting next to Wes and Sam here from Limp Bizkit. These guys are rocking, man. What's going on at the show today? How's it going?
It's going good. There's a lot of people here. It looks like it's going to be fun.
I can see you're having a good time already, man.
Heck yeah. I got a little bit of water.
So what time you guys plan on going on stage?
I think it's 6:45.
Now, the best place to start with Limp Bizkit is probably with its mascot, frontman, and most divisive figure, Fred Durst. Durst's upbringing wasn't anything too out of the ordinary or strange. He grew up in North Carolina and was a bit of an outcast for his interests, but overall he had a pretty normal childhood and was a pretty regular guy. He was just into skating and due to that got a taste for both sides of the culture, the more hardcore punk influence side of things, as well as the growing hip-hop and urban influence that was creeping into it at the time. These fascinations would become the later groundwork of the band when Fred would eventually meet Sam Rivers and, serendipitously, John Otto, and upon returning to Jacksonville, Florida, and after a few jam sessions, the trio resolved to start a band that was influenced by both metal and hip-hop. And from here, they would go through guitarists like Water before eventually landing with Wes Borland. Now, this is where the band normalcies tend to end, and we have to take a step back and talk about just how important this specific set of musicians was, and why if it was any other mix of people, the whole thing wouldn't have worked. Many write off Limp Bizkit as being terrible songwriters and a group of untalented hacks, but this couldn't be further from the truth. They just don't like Fred, and we'll get into that. The instrumentalists of the band were each phenomenally talented and skilled, and brought unique blends of technique and influence. If you take a Limp Bizkit song and just listen to the instrumental, they're full of complex melodies, techniques, subtle shifts and changes, and a ton of dynamics. It's easy for listeners to allow the whiny singing and corny bars of Fred to overshadow what is going on musically, but here, just listen to the instrumental of My Way. The layering and effects of Borland's odd but pretty melody, with the groove-oriented drumming of John Otto and the subdued but flavorful bass lines of Sam Rivers, each play along with each other to create a well-oiled machine unlike anything else. And if you were to remove even one of these elements, the song wouldn't hold up nearly as well. But together it all conjoins perfectly. This might be a later track, but even if we look at something from the band's first record,
you need to drop the freaking ego before you crash, before the headlights are simply glaring in your eyes and you're going down. What's the matter with the life that you're leading when you're bleeding? Everyone's thinking how much they hate you. It's not too late, dude, just that time for you to
we can still hear just how important everyone was. And this is what made the band work so well. Each member brought something to the table, and rather than show off, they all worked to complement and bounce off each other to make something unlike anything else and overall just serve the song. It also helped that most of these musicians were lifelong musicians, with Sam Rivers being a bassist from a young age, as well as playing tuba in his school band. John Otto, on the other hand, is a very underappreciated member. While mostly Limp Bizkit as the Wes and Fred show, John's drumming really can't be overlooked. Otto studied jazz and percussion at the Douglas Anderson School of the Arts, and if you ever sit and listen to the instrumentals of the band's work, it's clear how much of his skill and jazz influence is layered as the bedrock of the group. While he mostly sits as the backbone and plays what's needed for the band, he adds a lot of layers and technical fills that are less flashy and noticeable than a drummer, let's say, like Joey Jordison, but what he does is extremely important and felt more than it's heard. If you need an example of this, I would say just have a look at the major difference in how the percussion feels on any of the band's 90s output versus their original swan song before their hiatus, the Unquestionable Truth Part 1, as John was absent from the writing and recording of that record. Now, to round out the members, we do need to talk about Wes. While I did take a bit of a jab at how much attention is given to him, I can't deny that, he's my favorite member too. And in all reality, he is the most important member on the musical side of things. Wes's songwriting style, his odd and innovative techniques on guitar playing, and his experimental nature in terms of tone, layers, and sounds are the flash, flair, and heart of what makes the musical section of the band what it is. Hence why their only album without him was their biggest flop. But hey, there I go, getting ahead of myself again. Wes also differentiated himself by the way he presented his physical appearance. Where the other members were mostly dressed typically for the time, Wes would wear over-the-top and elaborate costumes, including masks, makeup, jumpsuits, wigs, and other things. This brought even more allure and intrigue to the band, and in many ways mirrored his musical prowess and just how much different it was from the rest of the band. Oh, he was also a student that studied jazz at Douglas Anderson, so there's that. But all in all, with this collection of musicians, the main building blocks for LP were in place. And the band's live performances would end up bringing them a small but loyal cult following, including being a band synonymous with the local Jacksonville club, the Milk Bar. All this would play out better for the band than most could ever know, even having a major label band, Sugar Ray, open for them while being an unsigned local act. Add onto this the band's propensity for having intense and energetic live performances designed specifically to push word-of-mouth exposure, and their name itself being purposely horrendous, all just to attract attention and dissuade those who would write them off for their name. Their future success was all but inevitable. But all this local success still didn't add up to a record contract. It wasn't until they had the chance to meet the guys in Korn that Fred Durst was able to sucker Fieldy into hanging out with him under the guise of giving him a tattoo. And during the session, Fred would play the band's demo. And this alone would convince Fieldy to take the band on and bring them out for multiple tours opening for Korn. This would all culminate in two major developments. The first was the addition of DJ Lethal, previously of House of Pain fame. Whose name and recognition would add some credibility and extra star power to the group, as well as bringing the attention of labels to the band, landing them a label deal with Flip Records.
This crossover thing's going on here in the 90s, and I think some bands have done a killer job of it. Rage and Korn and Sugar Ray and a lot of people and Deftones, but at the same time, no one's done it like us yet. You know, we take all of our influences and we mix them together because we're true and real to all that kind of music. We can't go in and say, hey, we're just gonna make some heavy jams, hey, we're just gonna make rap jams, because we don't feel like that all the time. And we're all totally different people. So we get in there, some days it's mellow, some days it's heavy, some days it's whack, some days it's good. But you know, I think our record is a representation of how we're keeping it real.
As with just about all the bands they cover, member shifts are common, and Limp Bizkit is no different, but not in the same way others would. Rather than go through members like water until landing on an iconic lineup, Limp Bizkit would land on their iconic lineup very early on, and the shifts would just be Wes leaving the band and coming back on a regular basis. One of the first times, at least of note, was after the band began to gain major attention and brought on turntablist DJ Lethal. This would lead to a disagreement between Durst and Borland would eventually resign. Around the same time, Mojo Records would come into the picture, and to which Fred apparently told Flip Records founder Jordan Schur that they wouldn't sign with Mojo unless their van flipped. And this ended up being prophetic, as on their way to California to record their debut, the band's van would flip more than 3 times, leading to some serious injuries, but most importantly, Fred would then start to take stock in himself and his life and decide to reevaluate things. This would be the catalyst for him reaching out and fixing things between him and Borland in order to get him to rejoin the band. And once he did, they would be set to create their first real album. Now, while this was all happening, Fieldy of Korn would begin to pester producer Ross Robinson to take Limp Bizkit on as their producer, though he would react apathetic at best and unenthusiastic at worst. Only listening to the band's demo once, his girlfriend had appraised it and got him to give it a chance. The sessions that would follow would be financed by Flip Records founder Jason Schur, who for the beginning of their career would act as the band's guardian angel during their early days. Seeing the money and potential behind the band, he also bought out their contract with Mojo in order to get them fully signed to Flip, and negotiated a 50-50 distribution deal with Interscope, which was pretty insane at the time considering how corrupt and money-hungry major labels were. Something else very important to the story here, though, is Ross Robinson's approach to recording the record. While I'm sure the emotional torture sessions that he puts nearly all his clients through were a part of the process, What's actually more important here is the more jam-centric improv nature of the recording process. This would bring far more experimentation into the mix and give an entirely new layer to the band's songwriting. Though this recording process would also be stained with a massive disagreement between the band and Ross over the inclusion of their cover of Faith by George Michaels. And if I'm being honest, I gotta side with Ross, it kinda sucks. Not long after the recording process, the band would release their debut record, $3 Bill Yall, continuing their theme in awful names purposely meant to repulse listeners. But the sound of the record itself definitely wouldn't. For a long time, $3 Bill was the band's most raw and intense record. Many of the songs play with a ferocious intensity and something that once you hear, you won't be able to stop hearing in the countless other bands who took from it. Even future feuders Slipknot, despite their negative comments regarding Bizkit, clearly took some influence from their heavier, groovier breakdowns on this record. And much like with Korn, when Limp hit the scene with their debut, it changed everything and was a breath of fresh air. And the first track, Pollution, really exemplifies that. The spacey guitar textures, heavy riffs, groovy drums, and even Fred's spastic white boy rapping on the track just gives so much life to the music. And the raw anger it's played with not only shows it was done by Ross Robinson, but that these weren't the LA wannabes many assumed that they were. Something followed up on with the second track, Counterfeit. Even at this early stage, it throws some stones. Particularly at the many bands from the scene who already began to copycat them, with Wes even retorting, "They saw this little thing that we built, and they were like, oh, let's get baggy pants and dress kind of hip-hoppy and, play heavy metal and rap. 5 or 6 bands just popped up out of nowhere that became these, groups that were trying to sound like us. It was ridiculous. That's where the song Counterfeit came from." $3 Bill also had a lot of tracks that broke away from the heaviness to show off the band's more experimental sound, with songs like Nobody Loves Me showing off more of the hip-hop sound infused with some punk elements, and my personal favorite off the record happening to be Sour, going out of its way to show the unconventional way the band approached songwriting.
But in the long run, you'll be the one regretting it. Maybe you won't, maybe you will, but baby, you're still about as real as a $3 bill.
Wes's two-handed tapping technique serves as the rhythm for much of the track, with his spacey, almost blues-oriented lead playing taking up the rest. This would all be contrasted with DJ Lethal's ambience and spacey scratching that all takes everything to the next level, and again goes to show just how ahead of the time and musically skilled this band of so-called talentless hacks was. While I already shat on the Faith cover, and in my opinion it serves as the album's weakest point, it still was an important piece of their early career. The rest of the record is also very solid and well worth your time, but considering how much music we have to cover, take my word for it, $3 Bill is more than worth your time and you should definitely give it a shot. Upon release, the band would support the record and build a lot of hype and bring in a ton of new fans by serving as the opening acts for bands like Helmet and Faith No More, as well as Interscope using a bit of payola to persuade radio stations to play their single Counterfeit as many times a day as possible. But as great as this was, it was also the beginning of many of the cracks in PR that would plague the band throughout their entire career. Many of the bands who played with them recounted that they were assholes, and mostly that Fred was kind of a douchebag. This included Faith No More's keyboard player, who would recount, "That Fred guy had a really bad attitude. He was kind of a jerk. I remember he called the audience at one show when they booed him. Not a good scene." While at the time this wasn't super uncommon, it would be seen as homophobia, and many of the band's growing list of critics would accuse them of it, as well as use Interscope's push and, honestly, pale in nature of promotion to claim that they were industry plants. And while this did little to stop them from growing, it is interesting to see that even on day one, Limp Bizkit was seen as uncool and problematic by critics and other artists, foreshadowing the future of their career. Though with their inclusion of the at the time brand new Warped Tour and alliance with Korn even being one of the direct supports for the massive Family Values tour with Ice Cube, Rammstein, and Orgy, it would cement them as a staple of the new wave of hip-hop and metal fans that would later go on to form the nu metal community.
Apologies for briefly taking over to be the host that will continue this retrospective, but right now we have greater things to discuss. I'm Daggz, and while Mads mentally prepares himself to tackle the rest of the Limp Bizkit catalog, I'll be here to discuss what is quite possibly the biggest turning point in the band's history.
How many people here ever woke up one morning and just decided it wasn't one of those days and you're gonna break some shit?
1999 was a very significant chapter in the nu metal mythos. While several bands were gaining extreme star power around this time, everything post-1997 seemingly marked the end of the first nu metal era. These once underground bands were starting to show their potential, and more importantly, their numbers to the big labels. Especially when just a year prior, Korn's third studio album, Follow the Leader, peaked at #1 on 4 separate charts, including the Billboard Top 100. With acts such as Slipknot, Deftones, and System of a Down debuting or really starting to show their worth around this time too, as well as huge genre-defining acts like Linkin Park still yet to even blip onto the scene, the movement had all the spotlight you can feasibly imagine shined onto it at this time, leading to higher production budgets, more airwave time, and music video slots up the ass. And this boom, for the most part, was incredibly lucrative to the people in the scene at the time. So enjoy it while it lasts, as this era would bring unforeseen consequences later on. Though one of the bands that would benefit the greatest out of what some may dub as the nu metal sellout era was, of course, our favorite cast of Jacksonville Freaks. Though on a leash, they were not. A major factor in the production of their upcoming second studio album was to attempt to finally completely divorce themselves from the now massive Korn. Around this time, the band was hell-bent on not proving just to the critics, but to the entire world that they can be more than just a one-hit wonder band in the shadow of a much larger group than them, no matter the warnings heeded by their labels at the time. To help get things rolling, the group swapped out Ross Robinson in favor for yet another legendary producer, Terry Date, who at this time was most known for his work for bands such as Pantera, Deftones, and Incubus. In hindsight, this change would ultimately prove to be incredibly lucrative for the band, as the sonic change from $3 bill Yall to significant Significant Other could honestly be pretty pulverizing if you were to listen to both back to back. Robinson's influence with his signature raw and improvised sound was swapped out for something a lot more coordinated and clean. Even down to the album art and the name of the record itself representing an image much more accessible than what has come before, and certainly what would come after. These changes even showing their face in the music itself. Although the juvenile nature of the band very clearly still shined through on the majority of these songs, sometimes to a fault, like a lot of Limp Bizkit records. But to deny this didn't add to the charm and attitude that Fred and the band very intentionally set out to capture would be disingenuous. And if $3 Bill was the band desperately trying to get their foot through the door to make a name for themselves, Significant Other's tactics would be more akin to just saying screw it and breaking down the door with an axe. Break Stuff. What is there to even say about Break Stuff? This song is Limp Bizkit. Borland's guitar playing the same addictive riff for the majority of the song's runtime, just to build up with a long interlude to eventually explode into the sonic equivalent of being shot up and down a trampoline. Or bassist Sam Rivers showing off his potential to be a creative powerhouse in his own right on songs like Rearranged. Paired with what is arguably DJ Lethal's best work he has ever done for the band, shining its way on practically each and every one of these tracks. Or John Otto making his presence known through this record's addictive percussion, taking him to the Matthews Bridge much prior to Fred making it official. And, of course, Fred's eccentric personality would tie all of these well-oiled cogs together in a symphony that would ultimately define a movement. It's been talked about to death at this point, but the music video to Break Stuff is honestly bizarre with how coordinated everything felt like to have this video age like a pure, unapologetic time capsule of the era. BMX and pro skaters flying all around Fred, the insanely well-picked cameos of Jonathan Davis, Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and Eminem, with the cherry on top being the entire theme of the music video revolving around who can do the best Fred Durst impersonation. If the numbers, production budget, or features even present on the album didn't sell you on how utterly massive this band was at the time, this video alone is enough to serve as a metaphorical slap in the face for you. Upon release, the band would continue to support the album through headlining that year's Family Values tour, but more notably, also headlining the 30th anniversary of the 1969 music event Woodstock. Getting into all the issues that plague this absolute failure of an event would be as long as the current runtime of this video. Poor spacing, overpriced food and water in a severely dehydrating and hot summer sun, and the several accounts of horrific sexual assaults reported to have happened during these shows. And who better to paint a narrative to blame for this disaster of an event than the band the world loved to hate. Limp Bizkit, and moreover Fred Durst, are typically scapegoated as being one of the primary reasons Woodstock 99 was such a catastrophic event, being shown to do things such as encouraging acts of vandalism when he saw a bunch of people in the crowd surfing off of broken pieces of scaffolding during their performance of Break Stuff.
That's some tight shit right there, that crowd surfing on the plywood.
Though you could possibly hold the band at some level of accountability for these actions, Fred was actually shown to try and calm the herd on multiple occasions. And consequences such as the rampant sexual assault and fires that happened the day later are events that hold responsibility much more in the hands of the security and venue holders than Fred Durst, or frankly any other musician present that day, who were all simply just hired to do what they're meant to do. Although this event would prove not to impact the staying power and popularity the band had at the time, ultimately being shifted into a net positive for the band. Durst's all press is good press mentality, even having them capitalize on the narrative spun about them in their music video for Rearranged. But if this incident didn't leave any short-term impacts on the band at the time, it still ultimately gave detractors a lot more ammunition against the band in its wake, which was just another nail in the coffin for Limp Bizkit's ever-growing controversial reputation. But it was about to be the turn of the century. It's time to see where this energy would take us in the following years, as we'll soon find out that we have yet to even reach our peak in this story.
I don't know. I think we're going back in to write a record now with the mind that we're going to the next level. Now, with the success of Significant Other, we have the luxury of the label going, do whatever you got to do whatever you want to do, go make the record, because we don't literally need to be in here making a record right yet. But it's like we can't sit around and we're tired of playing those songs already.
After the massive success and backlash from Significant Other and the resulting incident with Woodstock 99, the band met the turn of the century with a lot of energy as well as star power. It's honestly kind of fucking hilarious to think about it, but for a while, Fred Durst himself became a bit of a pop star, being all over MTV and in the celebrity drama cycle and news tabloids, rubbing shoulders with tons of other massive names for the time. It's something that you'll never see happen again, at least as far as I can tell, with a metal musician, but during this time, there was a bit of that happening. There was quite a bit of crossover with even Metallica enjoying this sort of mainstream attention. Now, during this era, a lot of the 90s rock and metal icons were going through a bit of a midlife crisis, angry about the success of musicians and artists that they thought were lesser, and overall taking shots at the new kids on the block. Pop singers, rock stars, and anyone else who appeared to be more celebrity than artists like Marilyn Manson, boy bands, or even Limp Bizkit and some of the other new metal bigwigs were all seen as imposters and posers. And in essence, it almost mirrors the attitude shared about the SoundCloud rapper wave. While this all might sound like unimportant fluff that could be summed up with the sentence, "The band was looked at as posers," it's important to bring up since the backlash and shots taken by people like Trent Reznor directly fueled the direction the band would go with their follow-up to Significant Other. Upon announcing the album, many thought Fred Durst was joking when he said the name was Chocolate Starfish and the hot dog flavored water. The name is a return to form for the band. Significant Other is not a bad name. Chocolate Starfish, on the other hand, well, it's hard not to see why people thought this was a joke. And the story behind it is even more bizarre. Apparently, the working title for the record was Limp Dependence Day, but they couldn't get the record finished in time for a July 4th release, and thank God, because that was an abomination of a title. Chocolate Starfish is a reference to an asshole, and as you can see, there's one on the cover of the record. And the hot dog flavored water bit comes from when Wes was in a gas station and saw Crystal Geyser flavored water. He joked about there being hot dog flavored water, and honestly, it's just a stupid name, though many fans have thought it to be a possible parody of Smashing Pumpkins' album Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, and that would make a lot of sense given the referential nature of the record. Its first track, Hot Dog, was a direct dig at Trent Reznor, who was making many negative comments about the band.
Look, I'm not going to say Limp Bizkit sucks, you know it, I know it, I'm not going to say it.
Wes Borland and Fred Durst were huge fans at the time. Fred directly cited Nine Inch Nails as one of his main influences. So with Hot Dog, you get him taking a jab with this.
You wanna fuck me like an animal. You like to burn me on the inside. You like to think that I'm a perfect drug. Just know that nothing you do will bring
referencing Closer, Perfect Drug, and Burn. It might be juvenile, but it perfectly sets the tone of the record, where Fred is tired of taking everyone's shit and being the punching bag, and now he's here to take some names and not care what anyone else has to say about it. And it's not some faux, fake badassery thing either. It is extremely self-aware about how juvenile and immature it is, but it revels in that fact. Chocolate Starfish would also be a massive musical shift again, pushing even further into both pop and experimental territory, containing a lot more hook-oriented songs, but also toning down the aggression and including a few ballads. This would also be paired with Wes's experimenting and a lot more of his guitar playing and sound palette being in the more abstract nature. And while I do prefer the aggression, The softer, more experimental side of things here does work very well, but this album is held back a little bit by one major flaw, and that's Fred himself. Now, if I haven't made it obvious at this point, I actually really like Fred, and I don't mind his white boy raps or his over-the-top nature. None of it bothers me, and I can care less what the band's critics have to say. But I have always hated just how fucking whiny he could be. And you know, on most releases, it's not that bad. But here, he whines constantly with some of his dumber lyrics in his career, and it really drags the album down from being as great as it should be. Now, despite this, Chocolate Starfish is still extremely solid, and is still one of LP's better outings, but it will test your patience. So why don't we just jump into the album and see what it has to offer. It opens up with a vocoded track hyping up the record, only to break straight into Hot Dog, which has some of the most experimental playing from Wes.
Everybody's judged by that fucked up face, fucked up dreams, fucked up life, a fucked up kid with a fucked up knife, fucked up moms and fucked up dads, a fucked up cop with a fucked up...
As well as that infamous amount of fucks thrown in the lyrics, as well as the Nine Inch Nails parody chorus, which we already talked about. And funny enough, the band would even include him in the credits of the record as a writer for this track, which Trent himself was forced to actually approve so the record could come out, which is pretty fucking hilarious to me. But besides the point, while Significant Other is the band's most famed record, many of the defining and most famous tracks of their catalog actually came from this record, like My Generation, a party anthem, and the infamous and unbelievably catchy Rollin'.
Hands up, now hands down. Tell me what you gonna do now. Breathe in, now breathe out. Hands up, now hands down. Back up. Tell me what you gonna do now. Keep rolling, 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 rolling. Keep rolling, 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 rolling. Keep rolling, rolling, rolling.
And I don't care how stuck up of a metalhead you are, or how smart you think you are, how wonderful and pretentious your music collection is and your taste. We all know that this song is infectious, and when it comes on, you're singing along with it. My Way might be one of Fred's more obnoxious vocal performances on the record, but its songwriting again shows off just how skilled the band was.
Just one more fight about a lot of things, and I will give up everything to be on my own again.
I already went over this earlier, so I won't go into it again, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but Wes really does steal the show with his guitar playing. Now, another song that is a little overlooked while still being pretty big is Livin' It Up, and to me it's actually a pretty big highlight on the record.
And I'ma keep my pants sagging, keep a skateboard, a spray can for the tagging, and I'ma keep a lot of girls on my bandwagon, cause I don't give a fuck, living life in the fast lane. I'm just a crazy motherfucker, living it up, not giving a fuck.
And I guess now would be a good time to talk about how many of these songs actually contain references, samples, and nods to other famous music. Well, it's easy to write off Limp Bizkit, especially at this point in time, for just being douchey frat guys making douchey frat guy music. It goes to further exemplify that these are actual artists who love the medium that they play in, paying homage to the music that they loved while making stuff that, despite negative remarks and all the negativity that surrounded them, showed that they belonged to stand up next to these other artists. I mean, let's go back to My Way for a minute. Tell me that this chorus doesn't scream about half of Linkin Park's classic choruses.
This time I'ma let it all come out. This time I'ma stand up and shout. I'ma do things my way. It's my way on the highway. This time I'ma let it all come out. This time I'ma stand up and shout. I'ma do things my way. It's my way on the
Despite the issues that it has, Chocolate Starfish stands next to Unquestionable Truth as one of my favorite records from the band. And if you can get past some of its more obtuse and annoying aspects, it's actually a fantastic record. But this is also when trouble really started to hit Paradise. The tours surrounding this album were massive, and they were playing arena shows and festivals and doing all of that, and all that was great. But this is also when the issues culminating from before started to bubble up to the surface. As I said earlier on, by this point, Fred Durst was straight up a celebrity, who shared stages with pop stars and flirted with that image more than just about any other figure from the metal side of the industry. His associations and support of artists like Eminem and Christina Aguilera would prompt a lot of criticisms and shots to be directed his way, as well as his asshole persona and constant shots at other bands, bringing unnecessary conflicts, such as when Limp Bizkit played a massive festival, and during their set, Durst trashed Scott Stapp of Creed.
Fred Durst did set off some fireworks that were aimed squarely at Creed singer Scott Stapp at the K-Rock Dysfunctional Family
Is that
Picnic
that guy's name?
on Friday in Homedale, New Jersey.
Just break it down. What
Are you a big
happened?
fan? Yeah, what happened there?
Well, for one thing, the guy is out of his mind. Like, he thinks he's a better human than everybody. He claims all this spirituality, this super killer guy. He doesn't give a damn about any of his fans. He ignores everybody. And you walk by his dressing room, his people, they look at you and they go, "You do not approach the band. You do not talk to the band. You do not look at the band." And you're just like, what is the deal with this guy, man?
Did he say something
and
to
he's
you?
in his videos doing the Jesus Christ thing, you know, and he's all, you know, he's just like, "Hey, man, I am badass."
Fred, were there
It's
any
like, come
actual
on, man,
words
put your feet on the
exchanged?
ground, because one of these days that's going to go away, and ain't nobody going to have anything to do with you if you act like that.
And while that lunatic probably deserved it, the retaliation was actually pretty fucking hilarious, where Creed's management would end up gifting an autographed copy of an anger management book to Durst, which, again, like, that's okay, that's some good shit, I like that.
They had one of their runners or one of their errand people go get a anger management control book, and they signed it to me with a biblical thing on the top of it, and you know.
Well, that was nice. They just want you to go to heaven.
But stunts like this were a dime a dozen. This was also around the time the infamous beef between Limp Bizkit and Slipknot happened.
Fellas, what's going on with Limp Bizkit? Is there a bit of a rivalry going on or what? Because you just kill him anyway. Limp Bizkit who?
You would have to ask the Limp Bizkit question. All right, I'm going to go on record right now. Are you guys ready? Are you guys ready? Limp Bizkit, somebody in Limp Bizkit had the audacity to say to one of our good friends, who's a very reliable source, that Slipknot fans are nothing but a bunch of fat, ugly kids. You know what? Hold on a second. You know what I said to that? Hold on a second. Hold on. I want to tell you what I said to that. One, I'm a fat, ugly kid. 2, Slipknot fans, for the most part, enjoy all kinds of music, like Limp Bizkit, maybe. So what you're basically saying is that your fans are fat, ugly kids too? Is that what you're trying to say to me, Mana? Huh? Is that what you want to say? You want to talk shit on the people that you care about, man? We will come here and we will kill you!
As well as their open association with Napster. Limp Bizkit praised the file sharing service for its ability to create exposure and get people's music out there, even if it came at a cut of profits, which most other bands, and most famously Metallica, were waging wars with at the time.
I mean, James blew up for you. He ignited into a fiery inferno for you people. Fire bad! Fire bad! Our team of lawyers and researchers have your names, and we're gonna hunt you down like the table scrap pilfering grab asses you are. Grab asses bad! So to conclude, rock on, Metallica fans. We'll see you on tour this summer, and you Napster users, we'll see you in jail getting gang raped.
Napster would even sponsor one of the band's tours during the same time. And while all this was manageable yet still a bit nuclear, it wouldn't be the worst thing the band would have to face. That would actually be yet another legal issue regarding their live shows. The less tragic of which would be them getting in constant trouble for playing these impromptu pop-up shows illegally, while the more serious one was one that involved another rioting incident, this time at the Big Day Out Festival in Australia, where the band would play a show that didn't have proper barricades, resulting in the trampling and asphyxiation of Jessica Michalek, which would prompt another legal battle, and according to Durst, would leave him emotionally scarred. Despite all the legal issues, feuds with other artists, controversial associations, and negative press from critics, the band would stay high on the charts and as popular as ever. But this is also when their stranglehold on pop culture and status as a chart-topping legend would begin to crumble. The band conquered the world and took it all by storm, becoming one of the biggest and most influential acts of their time, despite all the odds being stacked against them. But with culminating bad press and the short lifespan of any band that had an image similar to them that was especially associated with the late 90s, it was only a matter of time before their relevance would fall as more Y2K friendly artists would begin to compete, like Linkin Park and Papa Roach. Though most critically, it was the departure of lead songwriter and guitarist Wes Borland that would seal the band's fate. While Durst would claim the break was amicable, Ross Robinson, who had become close friends with Borland over the years, would weigh in to say that Wes didn't want to sell out for money anymore, and Wes would talk about how he himself wanted to focus on his new project with his brother, titled Big Dumb Face. While this didn't immediately kill the band, it would result in them releasing their worst album to date.
Each person listening to this thing from beginning to end is going to have a different reaction. You know? Some people the same, some people different, but maybe I'll just warn everybody that the results may vary.
After losing Wes, the band would begin to look for a new guitar player, and before a replacement was even announced, the band would step into a massive pile of shit and cause a ton of backlash. Now, it's a bit of a constant between almost every band that when a key and beloved member leaves, no matter who the replacement actually is, it'll be met with mixed, if not purely negative attention. But what really salted the wounds in this case was that the band would team up with Guitar Center in order to hold a contest to find the quote-unquote illest guitar player.
Despite the cold cattle calls, the band's excitement about discovering a musical diamond in the rough is no doubt genuine.
We want to play. We're out here, we want to jam with people we've never jammed with. We want to see if something sparks. Like the stuff we hear in the background, I mean, they're totally improving it with some strange kid from somewhere around here right now. When we find that guy, where we're like, holy shit, we're jamming tonight with somebody we think can fit our chemistry. When that day happens, you'll hear about it. It'll be a roar around the world.
Corny marketing aside, contests looking for new members are nothing new. A superfan having a chance to join their favorite band sounds like a dicey but possibly great way to get a replacement as well as win some much needed good PR. The only problem was that with Limp Bizkit, the entire thing was a ruse in order to sell Guitar Center products. And whistleblower Mike Henderson would out the band for holding real auditions behind the scenes. This would result in a metric fuckton of backlash and negative PR for the band. Nothing new for Bizkit and crew, but now was not the time for it, as they were already dealing with a lot of controversy and negative attention. And good old Durst would make things even worse for himself by, in a moment of weakness, posting Wes Borland's actual email address on the Limp Bizkit official website, encouraging fans to send him messages begging him to rejoin the band. And funny enough, most of the emails, at least by Wes's recount, would actually tell him to do the opposite and avoid rejoining. In the end, his replacement would be the guitarist Mike Smith, formerly of the band Snot, and if any of the members of Limp were victims of the reputation of the band, it would be Mike Smith himself. Snot was a talented and fun band that sadly didn't last long enough to achieve their full potential due to the death of their singer Lynn Straight. So Mike Smith, seizing the opportunity to take part in the at the time massive band Limp Bizkit, was a logical choice, though he should have paid better attention to just what was going on with their image and controversies, as things had already spiraled out of control. And Results May Vary really shows this off in its lyricism and especially its composition. Fred had forgotten that he was supposed to be playing up a persona, and during this time seemed to drink his own Kool-Aid, and you don't even need to listen to the album to see this. Just the working titles were enough. The first one being a nod to Kanye West, with the title being Bipolar, and the second one being the absolutely tasteful and wondrous title, Panty Sniffer. Though in the end, it would be Results May Vary, and the album itself was, not good. Actually, it was hot fucking garbage. The album starts off with a relatively harmless but still obnoxious intro before jumping straight into the track Re-Entry, which itself is not too bad, but the loss of Wes is instantly apparent as the song has a much more traditional metal guitar sound to it and more Deftones-esque sound overall. This is next followed up by the album's most famous track, Eat You Alive, where we get a decent guitar riff and overall okay song, but one that is absolutely ruined by Durst's less than spectacular vocals and atrocious lyrics where he thirsts after a girl. It's not a terrible song, and in middle school I thought it was awesome, but as an adult it just feels stupid and juvenile and not in the fun way of most their music. Honestly, I think the best way to describe what this record is like is that it really just comes across as a pathetic and juvenile midlife crisis, where the band just overall seems aimless and lost as they try to find that younger, more defined version of themselves and fail to do so. And this is even backed up by the musical direction of the band as well, as most of the album has a much more traditional sound to it, with its guitar playing, its drums, and everything being more traditional metal, and losing that unique and special feel that the band was defined by, in favor of something a lot more generic.
It's the motherfucking concrete, suicidal night shit, loaded with the fight script, popping all you copies, you keep watering down shit, thinking you can rap with that artificial outfit, your baggy pants and your bottle of crackers, fuck all of that shit, fuck all you posers, let go of the mic kid, and step into a world that you never seen.
This was the album where the band really began to sound more like their countless knockoffs than Limp Bizkit themselves. And look, if you're a super fan, or you just really like nu metal, then Results May Vary isn't completely awful, but it's definitely the weakest link in the band's catalog, especially among the records produced through their original run. Needless to say, the album would be torn to shreds by critics, and if the album itself wasn't bad enough, the resulting issues with touring and public backlash would mount to a near death to the band's career, with an infamous mid-set meltdown and show cancellation during one of the band's performances playing with Metallica, where fans would chant, "Fred Durst sucks," and throw shit at him on stage, ending with Fred screaming at the crowd and exiting the stage. Following this, terror threats and attacks in Asia would result in the band canceling many of their touring commitments on that continent, and due to the lower turnout and lack of profitability of touring within the States, the band would go on a prolonged stint across Europe before ending support for the record and having Mike Smith exit from the group. For most bands, this would be it, the career-killing album and the end of the line. But as you can tell by the runtime, that's not quite what happened.
I just feel like he's our enemy right now. He's definitely my enemy, and the antithesis of what this religion of music is. And I don't want him to hear this music. It's making me insane right now that they're about to play what we've been working on to him. He doesn't deserve to hear it. I'm just about to. I feel like my heart is going to explode.
Well, let's go in there and
So should I go home, dude?
Yes, you should.
Wow. I'm not training, dude.
I feel that way.
Why?
Like any toxic relationship, Fred and Wes always find a way back to one another to repeat the cycle. And in this case, at the end of 2004, Borland would once again return to Limp Bizkit. And while the resulting album birthed from this reunion would be one of the band's best, this definitely wasn't the triumphant return many fans would have thought it to be. The album would be written and recorded throughout the final months of 2004 and released in mid-2005, with no real marketing or label push. Fred Durst stated he did this in order to give the album a more underground feel with the release, while Wes saw it more as self-sabotage. The album would also largely see drums be performed by New York hardcore legend Sammy Siegler, as John Otto would be absent for the majority of the sessions and recordings, resulting in this more hardcore approach to drumming, which would in many ways define the sound of the record. As a whole, the entire thing acts as a bit of a return to form and a massive departure. Given the lack of information around this project, it's hard to tell whether this EP was made out of contractual obligation or just as something the band did to mend old wounds. It was obvious, however, that this wasn't your typical Limp Bizkit high-budget affair with flashy singles and larger-than-life lyrics and music videos. Rather, what we got was the Unquestionable Truth Part 1, a short but intense EP with far more serious lyricisms about the bad side of fame, political propaganda, the degradation of modern society, and most importantly, the Catholic child sex scandal. A massive departure from the braggadocious and douche-oriented lyrics of previous records. The music also saw a massive shift, returning to the more experimental nature of $3 Bill, but embracing an even heavier sound, and this is probably no surprise considering this was produced and recorded by Ross Robinson, the original producer who took them on for $3 Bill, Yall. The overall sound of the music takes a lot of progressive and industrial elements and kind of excises a lot of the hip-hop influence. It's still there, but it's much more of an undertone. And Wes's riff writing abilities and more traditional guitar techniques are on full display here, as well as Fred changing his approach to vocals as well, with more simplistic flows and a greater emphasis on harsh and screamed vocals, and for once, really toning down that whiny and more annoying aspect of his voice. And you know what? Maybe now would be the best time to pick this thing apart, because I actually have quite a bit to say about it. I think I know the real reason Fred decided to really sabotage this release, and I don't think it has anything to do with the lack of love of the music itself, but mostly due for the fact that this EP really breaks the larger-than-life persona that he had built for himself. Up to this point, the band was known as an embodiment of frat guy culture, with a machismo attitude and a vibe that would come to define them. And while Fred mostly meant this in a satirical kind of way, as time went on, he became more of that persona unironically, whereas Unquestionable Truth leaves that almost completely in the dust, showing a more honest and serious persona. This is probably also due to the fact that this was the first time the band had recorded with Ross Robinson again since their first record, and you can really hear his influence in not only the sound of the EP, but also the vocal takes. The first track off the EP is Propaganda, a song that revels in its heaviness and intensity.
While those who expose and pretend this life is just a big bowl of cherries, a bunch of fairies screaming to be scary. It's propaganda, sell it to the innocent.
The lyrics here are also dual in their meaning, The obvious being a jab at how media is used as propaganda to push off messages and ideas, usually to the detriment of the masses who intake it. Where reality is highly distorted, psychosis weaken the mind. Incline to small doses as we approach this ever-endless quest for vengeance, while those who expose and pretend this. But what many might miss is the jabs taken at the band's expense and the admissions of their role in this very issue. I'm a maniac, hard one to handle. You better come packing more than a scandal. Fucked over for the times I've been grateful. Fucked over led to times I've been hateful. Main attraction, fuck you in your pussy mouth. Come again, friend. Now we got some action. On and On is the name that they gave me, and your misery came here to save me. Essentially, this is Fred admitting that the more he was put into a box, the more he tried to embody it, knowing that many fans were young and miserable, and if he fed into that, he could profit and push messages. And the song's final line as it fades out that repeats itself is also a dual jab. Who is phony and fading slowly? You don't owe me, but I made you. Both an admission of the band's fall from grace and brag about their influence and impact, as well as a dig at the nu metal genre and the greater music industry itself, because during that time the early effects of piracy in online stores like iTunes were beginning to cut the industry's profits, especially for major labels, all while independent labels and bands were beginning to take greater stranglehold of the industry. The second track here is The Truth, and is even more self-reflective. The title alone is the message, where the band uses a more progressive and serious tone to the music to not only show off their chops, especially in Wes's amazing guitar playing and songwriting, but also Sam Rivers' amazing bass work. Giving a more technical bass line mirroring the lead guitar playing in portions while serving as a groovy backbone in others. And the lyrics here also cut deep in terms of Fred taking himself down, accepting that he might have been a negative influence, and even begging God for forgiveness in this later portion. One of its most telling lines being, "Somehow you've replaced all your gain with a debt. Now that payback's a bitch, why owe your life to a bitch? Absolutely pathetic, and regret it when told you made of mistakes. Imagine that insult's a blessing. Imagine accepting the truth." Like I said, it's an incredibly shattering EP to the persona Fred Durst had spent years building and maintaining. The third song off the EP is The Priest, and being that this came out in 2005, I'm sure you can guess just what the song's about. The track again takes an even more progressive shift, with Durst himself not even really rapping on this song. He spends most of it talking and screaming about the hypocrisies and scandals of the Catholic Church, specifically how they used their beliefs to cover up the evil deeds that they committed. During this time, the Catholic child sex scandal was in full effect, and many were seeing just how deep and dark the rabbit hole was and honestly still is. The song even references 9/11 and the tragic death of Dimebag Darrell, really showing how drastically society was beginning to crumble, and just how much changed since the band's glory years of the 90s. This loss of glory is also referenced in the interlude track, The Key, the only song to feature a beat from DJ Lethal, who for the rest of the record serves less as a DJ and provides more ambience and textures to the tracks to feed into the mood and atmosphere. This song again sees Fred wrestling with the loss of his purpose and feelings, and guilt due to the influence that he's had, channeling a lot of rage and expressing it toward the place that he had found himself. Though this is explored in much more detail on the album's next track, The Channel.
I don't like my childhood and do not need somebody else to blame. This is the
This is the song where things really come into a clear picture, with the lyrics focusing on the negative way that media affects people, with lines directed about teen magazines, celebrity drug use, and sensationalism, as well as the way politicians stoke the flames of war in order to rake in profits while hiding the virtue of their duty to be public servants. As the album comes to a close, it has one last punch before it fades off. And that's the story.
Just live and let die. Check, come on. If you could take a minute of your life, that's a minute when you feel the lightning strike. To each his own.
At some point we come down from the highs, and so be it. We move on with our lives. Some of us let the laughs cover cries. Do the math, you can laugh when I die. If life is just a fantasy, then you could live this fantasy life. If so, then would you? Just remember that the doors are not closable, and your motherfucking heroes are disposable. The bitter bite that this song has is what makes it my favorite off the record, and the way they both take a stab at the audience and themselves is what makes it so powerful. Fred mocks the listeners who hate him for the fantasy playboy life he lived, while acknowledging that they would all want it to be in his shoes. But he also takes a jab at how fake and phony that very life is, and that no matter how big the star, at the end of the day they'll all fade and no one will care. Though my favorite bit is actually its cheesiest section, though it does cut to the core of what the message here is.
Talk about some shit. Let's talk about the hardcore that ain't hard anymore. All the shit talkers who ain't shit anymore. All the old fighters who can't fight anymore. All the white kids who ain't white anymore. All the actors that can't act anymore. All the rappers that can't rap anymore. All the hipsters that can't hip anymore. All the lipsters that can't live anymore. Come on.
I know it's cheesy, but the delivery and music, it just hits the message home while being infectious and catchy. And a lot like what Daggz referenced earlier about break stuff and how it felt like you're just thrown onto a trampoline, it's the same with the story's breakdown. It's just fantastic and is the peak of the core Limp Bizkit sound that makes them such a great band. The final song off the EP is The Surrender, whose title fits perfectly considering not only its lyrics, but that it really was the surrender for the band. In it, Fred lets himself really level with the listener and tells them his heartache about the situation that he's in, not wanting to be seen as a monster or a victim of the life he led, with the conclusion being him surrendering. What drives this all home is the fact that this really was it for the band. After the EP came out, they would go on an indefinite hiatus, and for many, it seemed like the ride was over. This was the fall after the rise, the end of an era and the acceptance of it. And not only for Limp Bizkit, but around the same time, Korn would enter a dark age as they lost their guitar player and soon after their drummer. Linkin Park would also go on a hiatus, as well as Slipknot, and nu metal as a genre had just really faded out of the mainstream consciousness and run its course, with the Warped Tour scene and the Molgoth boom taking center stage and even indie beginning to rise up as well. Hip-hop, on the other hand, had also turned to a new direction, in greater favor of being a party-focused genre overall. The angsty 90s wave had finally reached its end, and with it, Fred would go on to work on movies, while Wes would go on to work on his own solo projects, as well as have a stint in From First to Last. Limp Bizkit's story obviously didn't end here, but this was the end of its original run, and it's also the story of how Limp Bizkit took over the world, against all odds becoming one of the biggest and most influential bands of not only the 90s, but of all time. Their influence can still clearly be heard today, and despite all the negativity, the controversies, and the overall hate directed at the band, even being labeled as one of the worst, they still held the spotlight longer than most. And when the time did come to return, they would rise again to great heights. But that is a story for another video. So for now, we'll put a cap on it here. I would really like to take a second to thank Daggz for joining me on this one. The dude's a great guy with great content, and he's got a lot of cool stuff planned, so please, if you enjoyed his portion, show him some support on his channel. I'll have it linked in the description, as well as in the top comments. But with all that being said, subscribe, support me on Patreon, follow me on Twitter, blah blah blah, give me your money, I'll see you in the next video.